Hi, I'm Mike Hutjens, Extension Dairy Specialist at the University of Illinois. This module will discuss forage feeding strategies with emphasis on small grain systems. We look at small grain systems. The crops would include wheat, barley, oats, rye, and triticale. We can include both winter and spring varieties, and some farmers may even plant succotash, which is a combination of several different grains. But it is our small grain type forages that we're going to harvest as a forage crop. We will harvest the crop primarily at the boot stage for high quality forage for high producing cows. Typical guidelines would be in excess of 15% crude protein, and this number can be a lot higher depending on the amount of nitrogen and manure placed on the land. We've seen it as high as 20% crude protein, but a lot of it will be soluble, and below 40% ADF. That's the magic number to watch because it can really jump up on us very, very quickly. So monitor ADF levels. The yields will vary, and I would call them average, typically 1 to 2 tons of dry matter per acre. Another strategy with this forage would be to harvest it at the milk to dough stage, which would be 7 to 10 days later. And as a result of that, we will end up getting more of an average quality forage. Protein content varying from 10 to 12% crude protein. However, the ADF is really starting to take off and can quickly approach 50 to 55 to even 60% ADF. It is becoming more straw-like at this point. However, the good news is you have higher yields, 2 to 3 tons of dry matter per acre, or almost double the boot stage. So you have to measure what you want, high quality feed or tonnage. If we go to the boot stage, this will be very difficult to make into baled hay because it's very high in moisture and is very difficult to dry, especially in the spring when we don't have good drying conditions like we would have in midsummer. The dry matter content should be the same as for haylage, depending on your storage structure. Well, what are some of the advantages of small grain forages? Made correctly and ensiled properly, it's a very palatable feed. Some farmers argue cows like it better than alfalfa grass legumes, and it can be a high quality forage if it is made correctly. Another big advantage is that it's a very early crop. If you seed winter wheat, for example, it'll be the first crop coming off the field. So if you're short on forages or you're going to run out of corn silage, it becomes a very good forage extender. It also fits very nicely in a double crop system in those parts of the United States where we have the degree days. Here in Illinois, it fits well with full season soybeans or a second corn silage crop type coming off the land. Another advantage is that this land opens up for manure applications. Many times we don't have a place to stick manure at this time of the year, and it's a wonderful place. Plus, the small grain forage really loves large amounts of nitrogen. So it works very well in some of our manure plans to utilize excess nitrogen in the manure. And finally, we will harvest this crop usually before we see a lot of heat and moisture stress, always ensuring a fairly good yield on the crop. But certainly there are disadvantages, and you've already heard the big one. Quality is extremely variable, depending if we get it right or wrong. A 2-inch rain just before harvest time can delay us from getting in the field, and the window is very tight, as you can see. Ideally 2 to 4 days from having a super crop to having heifer or dry cow feed, again depending on the moisture condition and degree days that are occurring at that time. Yield can also vary greatly depending on the type of small grain and the stage of maturity. And as we mentioned earlier, making hay is very, very difficult at this time of the year. Critical to having a good inoculant on this crop because it is much more riskier to ferment properly. It is low in soluble carbohydrates compared to corn silage, for example. And finally, be well aware, small grain forages love potassium. So if we have high soil levels of potassium, the crop can be as high as 4.5 to 5% potassium, which is a real killer for the close-up dry cow program. Management considerations, you can probably anticipate. We are going to manage this just like we would any other hay or haylage crop, based on how we're going to store it as we would any small grain. So they are very, very similar in management techniques. The small grain forages are very similar in feed value across species. For example, wheat and oats and barley will have similar feed value. Therefore, perhaps the major criteria you should consider is the dry matter yield per acre based on the variety of small grain and the type of small grain forage you are going to raise. Next, match forage quality to animal needs. If the crop can be made high quality, put it into your high producing dairy cow ration. However, you get delayed, don't stick it in the wrong structure or bag, or put it someplace so we can feed it to heifers and to dry cows. And finally, like any other good silage, we should evaluate the VFA profile. We've seen this profile before. Again, we will come down the legume grass profile, and again, you can look at these typical values. I will not repeat them for you, but this is what we'd like to see. And as we said earlier, perhaps a little bit more difficult to achieve compared to legume grass or corn silage. Well, this completes our module on small grain forages. Thanks and have a good day.